All right, good day, everybody. This is Jason Straight and Jody with the Cloud Pass Virtual Group. Our presentation today is being delivered by Kevin Wilkie, and the topic is Azure Data Factory version 2. Before we get into the presentation and I hand things over to Kevin, I'm going to go through just a few announcements here so that we can share a few things about our virtual group. To start with, our virtual group is sponsored by Spotlight Cloud through Quest. Spotlight Cloud is the first Azure-hosted database performance monitoring solution focused on SQL Server customers. It leverages scalability, performance, and built-in security of Microsoft Azure Cosmos DB. Spotlight combines the best of the cloud with Quest's engineering insights from years of building database performance management tools. And this is something I've actually used quite a bit in the past, and was quite the benefit to the environments that I've worked on throughout the years. I'm going to hand things over to Kevin at this point, and with our presentation, Azure Data Factory V2. So Kevin, you are now the presenter.
All right, as Jason said, we are actually doing on Azure Data Factory V2, one of my favorites. Get that to come up. All right, and I need this as well. Yep. Okay. I am the presenter. I've been working for over 15 years of SQL Server in various forums. I'm also a co-organizer of the past DBA Fundamentals Virtual Group. If you are a DBA or want to be a DBA, as I know most people really do want to be DBAs, it may not be at the top of their mind, but it is deep down virtually in their soul. They all want to be a DBA in some form or fashion. We go over the basics and a lot more as well. So please feel free to join us. We meet on Tuesdays. Most Tuesdays we'll have a presentation just like the one I'm giving. Usually more on DBA tasks, but they do go around to pretty much any other task that we can think about when it comes to SQL Server or Azure. With that, I've done multiple things between BI, SQL Server, performance tuning, pretty much anything with SQL Server itself or many other databases. But here lately, I have become an ADF fanatic. I really do like working with ADF in its various forms, what I can do with it, how to make it cleaner, faster. The way it works, in the end, it makes sense to me. It took a while to get there, but it's really fun once you start getting into it itself. So what is Azure Data Factory V2? First off, it's not SSIS. Kind of not. It's close at times, and sometimes it's far, far away from it. As we go through, I'll show some differences, the easy ones. Like I like to show, it's Marvel, it's comics, it's the same, but it's different. That's the easy way to show it. It's different enough that it's like enough that you will recognize some of the major things to it, but it's different enough that it doesn't quite work the same way it did before. So let's compare Azure Data Factory and SSIS. Azure Data Factory is a cloud-based tool. It does work between Microsoft Azure, AWS. I think there is a Google Cloud component to it as well. I'm not sure on that one. I've not had to use that, so take it at your will. But there are multiple different ways of getting in data into Azure Data Factory or out, or working through data. As we'll go through it, like everybody deals with Power BI, you get used to all of the different ways you can bring in data, move data around. It's the same components here. You can do all kinds of stuff with it and use all kinds of different sources. With SSIS, on the other hand, it's a desktop tool, and it requires SQL Server. You have to, for the SSIS portion of working with data, you have to actually have a desktop. You have to actually have the tool installed. If you don't have that, you're not going to do anything with SSIS. Whereas Azure Data Factory, you can actually do it all on your iPad, if you, or whatever notepad you have at this point. Also, to run SSIS, you have to actually have SQL Server itself available to actually run some of the data components of it. If not, you're not going to do anything. With Azure Data Factory, though, it's all run in the cloud. You get Azure Data Factory working, you're golden. Something to keep in mind. All coding is actually done in JSON, or at least you can get to it through JSON. You may not have to actually physically type stuff in JSON, but behind the scenes and such, you will see a lot of JSON. And I'll show that in some of my examples. SSIS behind the scenes is just straight XML. There is nothing else for it. If you look at any of your SSIS packages, they are all XML, period. That's part of what makes it fun when you're doing VSTS comparison of one SSIS package to another. Good luck with it because there is so much XML. It may have moved around the screen a lot. That's why SSIS does not work very well with VSTS. Also, SSIS does have a fairly powerful GUI. You can do a lot in it, and you can add additional components like BIMFlex. You can add that as well. It adds a whole lot of stuff, or allows you to add a whole lot of stuff, as well as just use the Visual Studio itself, which is a very powerful IDE. I can do a lot of IntelliSense work with it. I can work with multiple different file structures. I can work with lots of different kinds of files, bring them into my solution. Where, on the other hand, with the Azure Data Factory, I get something similar to this. I get what's on a web screen. Nothing more, nothing less. That's really all there is to the Azure Data Factory. There is no IntelliSense at all. At least not, as you'll hear, at least not within ADF itself. We'll talk about some of the additions to that, one of them being data flows. Hopefully y'all have heard of that by now and started at least looking into it, at least have a basic idea of what data flows can do for you. There is IntelliSense in that, at least where Azure Data Factory is concerned. But within ADF, at least in the version we're at now, there is no IntelliSense. Could that change tomorrow? Absolutely. Could it change at any point? We're just waiting for Microsoft itself to say, yes, you now get this functionality with its latest push. And then, there you go. Until then, we're stuck with no IntelliSense. But as you see, for most of when I get into a demo, you'll see you don't need a lot. It would be helpful, but there's not a lot you can really add or need to add. All right. Also, SSIS itself is an ELT ETL tool. There's lots of going back and forth between, you can grab from point A, this database or a file, push it to another one, do the transformations on the fly. You can do pull from one file, push it all into a staging database, work with it there, and we'll push out to the final destination. It can do all of that natively. Now, I've gotten into the habit, I did this several years ago for SSIS, working straight ELT. It's been a while since I've done any actual ETL work are needed to. I'm sure if under the right circumstances, obviously would change, but for the most part, I tend to stay ELT, which is good because Azure Data Factory, as it stands right now, is straight ELT. There is no ETL work. You definitely have to move data from point A to point B, do your work on it, and then move that data point to point D. I'll show examples as we get later on through the presentation. All right, so basic concepts. SSIS comparing to ADF. This one it takes a little while to get used to all these things and the differences of where some of this can lie. As you'll see, SSIS project is actually known in Azure Data Factory as Data Factory. That one is nice to know. It'll help you to talk to other people. Packages are equivalent to pipeline. This is where it really begins to get funky. You have to really have to remember what you're looking for and how everything works together. In SSIS, the data flow is known as a copy activity in Azure Data Factory. Control flows are control activities. The execute SQL is scripted tasks are all known as transform activities. It does take a little bit to get used to where some of this stuff is because of all this. Here's the big one that took me a little while to remember because I've been dealing with SQL Server for so long. The SQL agent stuff in SSIS actually becomes triggers in Azure Data Factory. And connection managers also become link services. This one is the hardest one to get to always remember what the differences and similarities are. I'll show an example in a few minutes to show more where that show the differences. All right, so the big concept to actually show where all this goes together, we have data sets, which is we're all pretty well used to, a table, a file, whatnot. Then it goes, that is pulled from a link service, which is the actual SQL Server, a Hadoop cluster, AWS, you name it, just wherever that lies. It can actually be on-prem as well, as we'll get to. And your network structure, your file structures, that's all there. So your activity, and this is the big one, data sets are consumed by activities, which are your store procedures, your copy tasks, things like that. And all of that is actually in the pipeline. It takes a little bit to get used to that, but once you can do it 2 or 3 times and can actually, as well, I'll show an example in here in a few minutes. This one is a good, actually I printed this one out, this slide here, when I really started working with ADF so I can actually see where each part goes, and so I could look back on it and see what each part will do. That, along with this last slide, this one here, those two were really some of my go-tos that I just had up on my wall beside my computer, so I could refer back to them to see where each one was, because along with everything else, trying to get used to, especially when you're trying to get used to the new packages and new places where things are, as well as a slightly moving target, where since Microsoft has this in Azure, they do come out with new updates fairly often. There was actually an update of some things actually on Monday of this week, so that was fun to play with and get used to. And they usually here lately they've not been breaking any functionality. They used to, sadly, for good reasons. It helped in the end, but just getting there was a little hard. So now, thankfully, though, it's much better. We have actually got it to where whenever they do an update, for the most part, you'll never know. It's so seamless now. All right, so with that, let's go into a demo. But first, let's talk about our demo set, because it is kind of important. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I actually work in healthcare analytics. I do a lot of work with different hospitals, data, a lot of different just patient data of all kinds. So the data set we're going to be using today is going to have lots of names, street addresses of people, telephone numbers, email addresses, social security numbers, you name it. If it's in the hospital at somehow, some way, we're going to show it. Yeah, that would be a HIPAA violation. So sadly, we're not going to do that. I know everybody was excited for a few minutes there, but yeah, no, sorry. What we're really going to be working with is the data set you can actually get. It actually just shows what's called the NPI of lots of providers that are anywhere across the country. It's freely available for anybody, anywhere. You can grab, there is lots of data for these people. Obviously, our providers and where they work. It's, like I said, it's all freely available. The NPI itself is a 10-digit identifier for the provider. And this provider will have this number as long as they stay as a doctor and are working and they're at a hospital. It doesn't matter if they move to a different hospital, they'll still keep that same NPI. And that's just how that's how they're set up. This data set has over 300 different columns and over 5 million rows. Yes, most people are not aware there are that many different doctors of all types out there. This is also can be the business itself, the hospital. It can be a doctor's office. There's lots of different data within here. Like I said, it has over 5 million rows. Yes, that's right, 5 million. So with that, let's go to Azure Data Factory itself. So the easiest place to come to, first starts off is adf.azure.com is the website for it, Azure ADF itself. It'll come up here. It actually has a few different little questions. Well, not questions, but places you can go. There's an overview section where you can look at everything that's on the screen, where you can look at everything within Azure Data Factory itself. You can create new pipelines using the author tool, which we'll be going to in a minute. And then there's a monitor section. Now, the part that I like to start off with most that is obviously going to be the most helpful for anything we work with is the connections, which I already have here on the screen. Section I'm going to start with is integration runtimes. That is actually, the integration runtime itself is just a very small app that will have to download onto any physical or virtual machine that you actually will be grabbing data from. There is already one already set up within your VNet or cloud itself. You just have to have it turned on. That part's fairly simple. But any physical machine you have to actually grab data on from, like your own physical network, you'll have to install a integration runtime somewhere on the network to actually be able to grab and push data from on-prem to Azure itself. And this is the one that was actually updated earlier this week. I don't think any of our clients we had to go out and manually update it. Everything just was automatically restarted on the fly. There was no change, no nothing as far as we're concerned. And I'll show you how I can tell that actually in a few minutes when we get there. All right, so with that, let us go. All right, So let's look at, I'm going to look at this one. I'm going to select this, and that shows just regular settings for it, and you'll see all of your Azure keys and whatnot you need to for it. This is a kind of important page as well for some of us. This one actually shows the different nodes that you can have on for Azure for the integration runtime itself. You can have it set up with passive, active. You can set it up in any combination. Thankfully, most of the data we grab from our clients we only have to have one. There's really not a lot of need for others. For most of our clients, we don't have. They're not really huge. Now, if we start getting major hospitals with lots of data that will be sent over time, then we would definitely be putting in at least one or two nodes extra, just so they can work in tandem, or keep, and especially you will be keeping one as passive in case one goes out, or keeping both active if you'd like. It always is good to have a backup. Concurrent jobs. This one is great. You can actually limit how hard your integration runtime will be working. Most of ours are set at 16. I think that's default, or at least it was when we started setting these up. Some of these we've actually bumped up. Some of these we've lowered. You just have to keep an eye on it, see how hard some of these processes will pull data, or if you need it faster for some of your clients, it's great, or different places where the integration runtime itself. Since we're spread out, getting data from across the country or across the world, this is a helpful piece here, because you can work through all that work yourself. All right, so here's the fix that I was talking about earlier, auto update. You can actually have that set, so it will actually go out and check. Since we are in Eastern, I am on Eastern time. This one is where it defaults to be. But you can schedule your default auto update to be anytime you'd like. You can actually see here I'm on the latest version, and you can even upgrade now if something failed earlier. Or you can always log on to the client's VM. You can install the integration runtime straight from Microsoft and work through there. But if it's not set to upgrade at any time, or if the client for some reason doesn't want it to update, and you'll manually have to go to that website onto the VM and update things as needed. It's just something to keep in mind. All right, sharing. This one I would sincerely work with your security department to discuss working on the sharing. This one is special. We've actually not found a reason to use this, just because like I said, we get data from hospitals. We get a lot of data from the hospitals, so truthfully, I don't think with HIPAA, I don't think that's recommended. And any security department will scream and have just normal fence over that one if you do decide to share it. I don't think I can personally use this at least for HIPAA work. But I'm sure there are different reasons people would do that. But always check with your security department first before using that one. All right, so also then let's go to the monitor section of it, the wonderful dash icon here. All right, as you can see here, I can see lots of data about how good this integration runtime itself actually works. You see it's running, which is always a good thing to know. What version they're on, how many nodes they have. If you have more than one, obviously it'll show here and which ones are active. Which are great if high availability is enabled. But my favorite thing is right here, the available memory for this integration runtime. The way we have our set up, and I think it's a recommended practice from Microsoft, is to actually install the integration runtime onto a separate machine that nothing else is being run for on the network. And from there, you can pull any data and nothing else is affected by that, by the integration runtime. Like say in some cases we actually have integration runtime on a passive cluster for the hospital. So we can just pull off a read-only copy. It makes it quick. There's nothing really going on that server, so you won't be affected by however hard this thing works. You can see the utilization. If they're talking about how hard it's working, you can always lower the concurrent jobs. You can do a lot of work from here to see how well that one's running. All right, so let's go back to this one. If it'll come up here. There we go. All right, so now we know about integration runtime itself. Link services is also a thing that we kind of have to know about because it's how we actually will be connecting to the integration runtime. So the one I want to get to is actually down here. I'll call it link service MI. So we have our little connection string, how we're connecting to it. And that's really all we have to have for our link service itself. You can use your Azure Key Vault to grab data, to get the password. It works. You always make sure it works after you've set one up. It does, thankfully. That's always a good sign during a presentation. All right, so from there, let's go into data sets. So the one I want to look at in this case is, I call it Kevin Azure MI NPI data. I knew it'd come up there. All right. Name is very simple. I know there is, let's see, make sure I can do this. Yes, all right. So you cannot have a space before or after. As you see here, the data set's invalid because only numbers, letters, and underscores are allowed on as the name. You cannot have anything special. Obviously, you want to end it with an actual something. You don't want it to go with just a blank at the end. So we get rid of that, and it goes back to normal. Our connection. We have our link service. In this case, you don't have to fill in the table itself, but to make this easy, I'm just going to show this connection. And then you can do a schema. The schema itself will actually go through and show all of the tables, all of the fields within the table. You'll notice there's 329 of them. We can go ahead and preview that one. This will actually use the link service to grab the data itself. So there we are. There's lots and lots of data in here, and you can see all kinds of columns. Most of it's complete gibberish to us. Don't mean a lot, but for a fair amount, it will actually mean something. All right, so let's actually take a quick look here at, nope, not that one, this one, all right. So let's look at, because I have it on my server itself. Takes a second here. All right, you'll see there's 329 rows showing in for columns. We've got over, let's see, 5,690,969 rows. And let's just quickly look at the top 100. So you can see there's lots of columns, and it shows basically the same thing you showed in that little preview. All right. And that's on my one server. Then we're actually going to copy it, or attempt to copy it, over to our other server. This is in Azure, in the VM. As you'll notice here, the link service is Integra Azure VM Operations. It's a different link server than this one. That is very important to remember, this difference. as we'll get to in a few moments on how to work through some of this stuff. So let's go back to this one. You'll see I have no data, I have nothing there. All right, so let's create our first pipeline. To create a pipeline, you simply go to the little plus, click on pipeline. And it gives you a number of different things that we can look at. Oh, I want to go back to that. All right, so first thing we want to do, we don't have to do all the funkiness with creating your connection first or doing this, that first. No. First thing you do, you can actually go to, actually in this case, we're going to do a move and transform. So we're just going to copy data. We're going to copy some data from as you see, it's also set up like the last one, where you have to actually have, you have to end with a letter or something. It can't be a space. As it says here, spaces are only allowed in the middle of a name. You can actually have underscores and dashes in this one. So we're going to copy from Azure to VM. Nope, actually we're copying from Azure to VM. This one is still I have to sometimes look about because it's thankfully it's different when you start looking at it, because if you figure this one out, this actually is showing 7 days it can time out. I have yet to see one last more, well, I take that back. It's been a while since I have seen something last more than about an hour to time out. It's rare that you'll see anything over an hour or two. But for some reason, for whatever reason, at some point I need to ask Microsoft why this default is 7 days. I have yet to see anything over about an hour or two. You can set your retries, how long to have between retries. This is actually in seconds, I believe. Yep, in seconds. All right, so we're going to get our source. So we get our source data set, which we have set up from our last screen. This one I am going to actually use, since I've been smart and named it something that I can use to remember, hopefully. As you see here, the source data set can be a table, a query, or a store procedure. So you're not limited to only grabbing from one specific table or having to set up views or having to do anything. You can do several different kinds of different funkiness, and you can preview that as well. Now we want to actually send it to somewhere, obviously. Because what's the point of grabbing data if you can't move it anywhere or can't show it to someone? So now we want to get our sync data set, which is also just a destination. I'm going to send it to operations. There's no store procedure for that. You can actually, before you move anything over, you can pre-copy some work to it. Very seldom do you use, well, at least we've used that. It's great in case you have to do anything before, like a store procedure or anything, but for the most part, it's left blank. Mapping. This is where you would, like in SSIS, everyone should be used to the copy from this data set to that data set, all the lines between the two. Settings, data integration, always one of those days, data integration unit. This one, as it shows here, is, this really tells how hard this one should work. Do you want to give it, like, a really basic example would be like, do you want to give it 2 CPUs, 4, 8, 32, 256 cores? That's really all it's showing. And sorry, I clicked off of that. All right. And this is back here on settings. This is your degree of copy parallelism. We've been working with SSIS for a while. You really understand that one. Yes, that one seems to be fairly basic. Now, there is a problem with doing this, because as you'll see when I hit validate, Source and sync in the copy activity must be connected via the same self-hosted R. Basically, all that means is you can't do it because you're doing it across integration runtimes. So, sadly, this one won't work as easily as it showed to start with. What you end up having to do, and I always do it this little slightly different way. Well, yeah, I do it just a little bit slightly differently than I just showed on that copy screen. That will come up here. All right, so let's go our old normal way. Oh, I see why, because I went through that. All right, go back to this screen. All right. Now we want to create our new pipeline. And we want to go back to here. And we want to copy data again. We're going to copy from, we want to copy from the Azure to, it always takes a minute here for some reason to actually get this stuff, and hopefully I have not just completely slowed it down. Okay, there we go. Copy Azure to the data lake, because that's where we're actually going to move all of our data to. It's a great staging place for all of our stuff, and yet again, it leaves the timeout at 7. We change our source to, yet again, one of my favorite names, NPI data. We want to grab the entire table. We want to push this Azure Data Lake Storage. Now let's look at that, because that one does look a little different. Not a lot. As you see here, it's Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 1. We want a connection, our normal connection, and you give it the file path. As you'll see here, this is where all of our stuff are set up. You can set it up different ways to bring in data itself. And this is what we're actually going to call this NPI data 2. We can adjust the format itself, whether it be text, pipes, character returns, whatnot. Let's test the connection. Make sure that's working good. Yes, all right. Schema, and then you allow these fine, because we know that one connects good. And now that's done. And that's where we want to sync to. We also want to make sure, actually I'm going to do none of these. At this time anyway. Most of these obviously I don't need to flatten it. I don't need to merge anything. I just leave it alone, and I'd be good with that. And now, if we all hold our fingers and cross our toes that the demo gods are looking down on us and smiling again, validate should work. Yep, we're good there. Now we hit deploy, or debug, because that is how you actually run through some of this. And that actually sets off a trigger, which is what happens. I mean, you can actually see down here that it's working pretty well. And this does take a little bit of time. You can sit here and watch it. I think when I last copied it to the data lake, that took about, I know it took less than 10 minutes, but I want to say it took about 6 minutes, because it's a fairly large data set. But I'm actually going to skip through that. I can actually show, this is a tool you actually can use, or at least I recommend using, to go into look at the data lake itself. You can, it's a free download like everything else. Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. You'll go down to where it shows. You'll figure out quickly where it goes, and you go to the correct file path that you actually set up for the data lake linked service. You go there, and this is how big this file itself is on the data lake. This is all just straight data itself. You'll notice it's 624 meg, sorry. And it's as simple as that. There's not a lot of differences going back and forth on it. You take a lot of work out over time. One of the main things that I hope people remember to do over time is to either run a PowerShell script to delete old data, especially from you'll never need anymore. Hopefully you have an archiving strategy, as most places do. And then I think it's fairly easy after that. Yeah, this one is probably be running for a little bit. It's a little over 2 minutes. But I'm not going to let y'all sit here and watch me just click the refresh button while it does that. And that's really all there is to copying data and working with data in Azure Data Factory. It's like I've shown, hopefully it's pretty simple. You get a decent idea of what goes on for that one. With that, let's go back to the PowerPoint stuff. That's really the demo itself. That hopefully get a good idea of what you can do and what we like to do with Azure Data Factory. It's really used for just a staging tool, moving, copying tool. You get really good at setting all things like that up. And then you can we have a number of other things set up to run store procedures after the copy is done, but you have to keep that within the pipelines. You can have multiple, like with SSIS, you can have multiple activities on a data pipeline. I'm just trying to show you an example of the big one that you do most of the time, just copying data back and forth. So the other big thing that a lot of people ask questions about with Azure Data Factory itself is pricing. That one, it sounds huge and it sounds crazy and wild, especially when you see how much you have to pay for Azure itself. It is part of the beast. This one is set up actually not too bad overall, at least for the ones that I've seen for it. Like everything else, it's set up per operation. Notice it is per 50,000 read-write operations. Truthfully, as much data as we're pushing through for all of our integration runtimes, for all of our clients, this is really low, because remember, it's 50,000 operations. It's really not a lot, especially if you use the ADF for just copying data between different sources. There should not be a lot of read-write operations. So this one stays pretty low. Monitoring is monitoring all of those 50,000 operations. It's, like it shows, it's a quarter for one. It's really, really low. The orchestrations itself, so meaning every time a actual pipeline is run, if you run it 1,000 times over a monthly period, you've done a lot of running of those. Thankfully, we have rather large pushes of data, so it's not, this number stays really low. Then there's the executions, which are multiplied by quarter per hour. So the data movement unit itself, like I said, these numbers are really low. The activities external to the pipeline, as you see, it's way, way low. It's not even a quarter. It's 4/10 quarter divided by a lot. It's really low. These numbers will never or should not be really, really high ever. Then for each integration runtime itself, you've also done the same way. However many activity runs, executions of each. It's, like I said, it's a really low number. I think, you should not get affected by these numbers. These numbers should not dissuade you from moving into ADF, because it's, like I said, it's really low. If you need any more information on using Azure Data Factory, obviously you can always contact me. But there are a few books out there that I do recommend. First one being The Understanding Azure Data Factory. It's a helpful book. Obviously not as helpful as just getting out there and working through it yourself, but it's up there. I like this one, and I also like this one itself by Mark Beckner. And also, there's also my favorite documentation of all time. It's Microsoft's Azure documentation for ADF. It's actually very good. It was extremely helpful. Also, like everybody else, you can go on some of the forums or Twitter, and they, like everything else, the wonderful SQL community is here to help. They will help you as much as they can, and sometimes possibly beyond. They will give you as much help as you need. Someone out there knows or has seen the issue you come up with and know how to power through it. Even if you end up talking to Microsoft itself, someone from Microsoft will respond. It's that good. So with that, there are more important links here that is I just like to show. This is where you can get the pricing calculator itself, which I showed on my last screen there. There's documentation that is extremely helpful. They covered a lot of scenarios that thankfully we did not hit, and a lot of scenarios that you will, just to help some of this stuff up. The ADF v2 concepts. It helps. I think that's where I got some of the original documentation and things to show the differences between SSIS and ADF, and keep that in mind. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming to the presentation today. You can always reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn, my email, or you can go to my website, sherpadata.com. And with that, I turn it back over to Jason.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you for presenting here today, Kevin. And the questions that we have here is actually just one question asking about if your slide deck will be available after the presentation.
It will. I'll work with you, Jason, to put it out there where everybody can get to it.
Sounds great.
That's an easy flow.
All right. Sounds good. There are no other questions, so at this time I think I'm going to close things out. Thanks again for coming today and presenting, Kevin, and thank you everyone for attending. And everyone have a nice day, rest of the day.
Thank you all so much.